get started on this exercise, you should have downloaded the Tonal Practice JPEG from the class page. Once it's downloaded, go ahead and launch Adobe Photoshop, and let's open up that JPEG in Photoshop. To set up for this exercise, the tool we're going to be using for all of these will be your regular brush tool. Before we begin, make sure you've reset your foreground and background colors to be just the black for the foreground and white for the background. Additionally, go down to your Layers panel. We've got a background that's going to be the JPEG, but we want to do all of our sketching in a new layer that's on top of everything. And if you want, you can rename this layer Sketch. Finally, with the brush tool selected, let's go up to the control panel and pay attention to the brushes that we have loaded into your system. By default, all Photoshop has the general brushes and a few of the dry and wet and maybe some special effects brushes. We're going to be using a new set, or actually it's an old set, called the Legacy brushes. These brushes, if you don't see them down here, can be found by clicking on the little cogwheel, going down to Legacy brushes, and this will ask you, do you want to restore the Legacy brush set to your presets? We'll say OK. Now, when you return back to the panel, the Legacy brushes can be found at the very bottom. When you open them up, you can see there's a bunch of other subfolders underneath it. All of the ones that we're going to be using can be found under the Dry Media Legacy brushes. And you can see they're all listed down here too. Finally, if you don't see the preview for what these brushes look like, you can return to the little cogwheel and make sure to list all of your brushes using the name and also showing the brush stroke. This will give you an idea of what it looks like as you move forward. The final thing I'll say is that if you need to find a specific brush that I mentioned in the instructions, you can type the name of it and search the name of it in this field up here, and that will filter out all of the others. Just make sure you're using the ones from the Dry Media brushes from the Legacy brush subfolder. Now we're going to be drawing inside of each one of these squares. To make it easier to stay inside of each square, the tool we're going to use is your Magic Wand tool. If you don't see it, it's usually hiding underneath and nested with the Quick Select or Object Selection tool. With this tool selected, do make sure you're working in normal mode, and also make sure Contiguous and Sample All Layers is checked on. It's very important that both of these are checked on because we're working in the sketch layer and we want to be able to pick up the pixels on other layers as well. If we do the command and the plus sign, I'm going to zoom over to this first one. With the Magic Wand, this will allow us to click inside of the square, and now you can see it's nice and selected. If I was to choose my brush tool now, you can see any painting that I do will always stay inside of that squared area. Additionally, since I have the sketch layer selected, when I hit the delete key, it'll delete away everything that's inside that selected area. So if you make a mistake or need to back up, you can always hit delete on your keyboard, and that will give you a fresh area to be able to work in. Now the first brush that we're going to be using is going to be the charcoal pencil. Again, if you need to search for it, we can go to the search and do charcoal pencil. Do make sure you're using the Dry Media charcoal pencil under the Legacy brushes. So this is the one that we want to use for ours. With this one selected, we're not going to change the size or the hardness or anything of it right now. Instead, make sure the opacity is set to 100% as well as the flow. Your smoothing is turned down to 0%, and that none of the other options are turned on for pressure sensitivity. We just want to use the brush as its native form. Within this first square, I want to practice just drawing some straight lines going from the top to the bottom. This may seem simple, but I want you to strive to keep all of your lines nice and parallel. It's okay if they're not perfectly straight. It's even okay if they tend to touch each other, but strive to keep them evenly spaced with an even pressure as you go from the top to the bottom. With this particular brush, if you go too light, you can see how it gets a thin line, or if you press too hard, it's going to get much thicker. This brush is meant to mimic exactly what it would look like as if you were using a charcoal pencil. If you were using that in real life, the harder you press, the thicker it tends to get. or the lighter it would be. Now this is going to come in handy later when we do our tonal practice and actually go from light to dark. But for now, we're just going to practice making some simple straight lines from the top to bottom and fill up your entire square area. All right, now that we're done with this, let's deselect the area. You can go up to Select and choose Deselect. Notice the keyboard shortcut is Command D. With that, let's scooch over to the second one. Again, choose your magic wand tool, and by the way, the keyboard shortcut to quickly choose your magic wand is the W key. Clicking in the middle, this will select the square. We can then press the B key to select our brush, and we can begin painting inside of here. For this one, let's turn on our smoothing. Set your smoothing all the way up to something above 85%. The number really doesn't matter as long as it's nice and high. With smoothing turned on, when you click and drag, this is going to make it feel like your drawing is lagging a little bit behind you, but it's also going to make it a little bit easier to draw straight lines going all the way across. I say straight lines, but at least lines that can get closer and be a lot more easier to give you a smooth style versus the first time we did it, where the lines tend to be a little bit choppy and a little bit more rough. Going from one side to the other, get that muscle memory in of drawing horizontal lines back and forth across your screen. If you wanted to swap it up and go from the right to the left side, you can also do that as well, or from the left to the right. The main thing I'm getting from this particular exercise is that you get an understanding of how to do the hand-eye coordination when working with your drawing tablet. I'll do Command D to deselect it. Let's hold down our space bar and we'll scooch over to 3. Press W, get our wand and select the area. Press B to bring back our paintbrush. For level 3, let's do some horizontal lines. Again, you can keep your smoothing turned on. And again, you can also practice going from top to bottom or up and down and swap it back and forth for this one. If you do make a mistake, you can always do Command Z and it will back up and it will erase away the last thing that you did. Keep in mind when working in Photoshop, Photoshop only remembers about the last 50 things that you've done. So you can't infinitely undo all the way back to the beginning, but you can undo several things that you've done all at once. If you need to redo something, by the way, it's Shift Command Z. And again, these don't have to be perfect. Try to keep them as even as possible. Try not to overlap them, but if they are a little bit wavy, that's okay. This is your drawing. You take pride in what you do. And there we go. With this one done, we'll do Command D to deselect. Let's go over to the fourth state. Grab your magic wand, click in the middle of it, grab your brush. Let's do some cross-hatching. As we did with the others, let's start by doing just some vertical and horizontal lines. Also with this one, let's turn our smoothing back down to 0. This will make it go a little bit faster and also give you the ability to freehand draw a little bit more. Another good tip to know is that if you zoom out and have the square be a little bit smaller, typically you can draw straighter lines because you're not having to move your hand or your fingers as far as you've done before. The downside with this is that it does take a little bit of practice to keep everything nice and smooth. For me, I like to actually zoom in just a little bit. Right about here is comfortable for me. But we'll start off by doing just some vertical lines. Then let's cross hatch it by going horizontal lines, going left to right, all the way across it. Again, strive to keep everything nice and parallel as possible, but it's okay if it is a little bit wavy. That's all part of the natural sketching process, and it also helps develop that muscle memory that you need for working with the hand-eye coordination of a drawing tablet. All right, looking good. Let's deselect that by Command D, Shift over, press W to get your wand and select it, press B to bring up your paintbrush. Now let's do some diagonal cross-hatching. Just like we've done before, we'll begin by creating a series of diagonal lines going one way, and then when we're done with this, we'll create some diagonal lines going the other way. All right, with this done, we can Command D to deselect it, and I'm going to zoom out. You can see how using just the same brush in a variety of different directions can give you a good continuous tone, whether it's single line or crossed hatched. For the second row, we're going to be creating a series of continuous tones that go from lighter to darker inside of the little squared off area. For these next four, we're going to be using the same charcoal pencil type brush that we've been using for the others. Later on, we'll swap over to a stippled brush. So let's zoom into the sixth one, grab our selection tool and select it, and then grab our brush tool. Now to create this tone, we're really going to lean into the pressure sensitivity of our brush. Do make sure the opacity is still set to 100% as well as your flow, and I've also set my smoothing down to 0. I'm going to start off here at the top corner, and just very, very lightly, I'm going to start going back and forth in the same direction, making light marks. Now initially it's going to be the same tone, but you can see as I start to spend more time in one area, or as I bear down harder, I can make it become much, much more dense and therefore more darker. What I want to do is to have it slowly, gradually get lighter, so I'm using lighter pressure as it moves down to the bottom corner. Now the trick is we want to be able to fill up pretty much the entire square and make it look like a good continuous tone. So I'm going to go back and forth, being sure to get the edges all the way down to this bottom edge. And then if I need to, I can go back. This top corner should be nearly 100% black. And then as it gets closer in, it should slowly fade to about 90% black. And then 80, 70, 50, all the way down till pure white down here. Now if you do wind up making a mistake, like let's say you have a dark spot like I have here, rather than erasing it away, we're going to go over to our fill color and let's swap it out to be white as our foreground color. Now that we're painting white, we can go back in on top of it and lighten up any area that we have. Again, I'm also striving to have these go the same direction for number 6. We want everything to have that side-to-side feel. By the way, another good keyboard shortcut to know is the Shift X will swap back and forth your foreground and background colors. So if you need to quickly swap back to white to black, Shift X is what you can work through. Fill it in. Make sure the corners and all the sides also get a good treatment. But it's okay if it looks sketchy, and it's actually okay if it's not 100% perfect. My main concern with this is that you get a good feel for how the techniques are used just for doing sketching digitally. With this one done, let's deselect it, scooch over, use our wand to select the next one, and then we can swap back to our brush. Now as far as this one goes, we're going to start off similar. We're going to add just a simple tone of lines on top of it, going one direction. And again, it's okay if you mess up, but make sure you go all the way to the edges with one tone. Then we're going to cross hatch it to add the darker values. So go in one direction and then finally go in the other. You may find that you have to go over several of them several times. And also don't be afraid to use a harder pressure to get really dark, especially in this top corner. But this cross-hatching technique is one quicker, a little bit easier way to add a lot more texture to your drawing, as well as adding shading and value to each little area. And remember, if you want to further blend it, let's swap out our foreground and background from white to black. And then I can go back and I can actually paint some white strokes inside of this to break up any areas that may either seem choppy or may just need more blending with these strokes. So you'll see me constantly swap back and forth between white and black, but do strive to keep the same directional pen strokes. In other words, don't go vertical and horizontal if you're already going diagonal for everything. I'm also squinting my eyes. That's another way of kind of blurring everything together. If I see I've got an area that could be much darker, like this corner, maybe I'll go back and I'll add a little bit more love to it. I want a good, subtle transition. I also don't want it to be too stark. All right, with that one done, let's deselect it, move over and select the 8th one. Grabbing my brush, let's have some fun with some other ways that we can use our pen. I like to call this the little X or just the crisscross kind of method. All I'm doing is going back and forth and making these quick little X hashing marks. Now with this really adds more of a fur kind of texture to it. Unlike the lines, in order to build up the density, of course I can use a stronger pressure, but I'm doing the same little technique back and forth. This will take a little bit more time to fill it up. This is usually where I like to put on some music or a podcast and just zone out to what I'm doing. But eventually you'll start to fill up the entire area. All right, with this done, do notice that I had to go back and forth several times to get a good tone from one edge to the other. Don't be afraid to always add more value that really pushes it to the darks, as well as lighter values to make it much lighter so that you get everything in between. Let's deselect it, move on to number 9. This one's my all-time favorite, simply because I like to use it whenever I work with a pen or a marker to be able to create this effect. We're just going to do some scribbles. Oops, swap over to black. There we go. Kind of mindlessly going through it. As with the others, the denser or the harder we press will make it darker. And we just want to fill in this entire area, but let it be lighter as it comes down here. So real light pressure, almost barely touching my drawing pad, and then back to normal pressure up here. All right, for this 10th tone, let's move over to it and select it. We want to use a stippling technique. Now you can use stippling technique with your digital pen. The problem is, man, it's going to take forever drawing a bunch of little dots, plus it's really going to wear and tear on your digital drawing stylus that you're working with. Instead, we're going to take advantage of some of the pre-made brushes that are already inside of your brush panel. Locate the flat point scattered no spacing brush. That's a few above the one we're working on. With this brush selected, you can get an idea in the preview that it's already going to give you a variety of random little dots. with this brush. Now when I go in, I'll zoom in so we can see it just a little bit better. This is going to make a variety of little dots already on your screen. It fills it in really nicely without having to do all of the work of making all these little dots. Alright, with this one done, let's zoom back out and deselect everything. Now you can see how you can use the same pen or a pen that has some sort of texture to it to give yourself a variety of tones that go from dense to less dense, and thus achieving a lighter to a darker kind of shading technique. For 11 through 15, let's play around with some of the different brushes that also give us some textures or the ability to draw off a variety of textures. I'll zoom back in. Let's go down to the 11th one. Oops, zoom back out. There we go. Choose your wand tool and select it. Get our brush tool. The brush that we're going to be using is going to be the Conte pencil. So we'll zoom out so I can see it. There it is. Conte pencil on a bumpy surface. And again, this one already has pressure sensitivity built into it, and that's what we want to use to draw off these lines. In this case, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more, and we're going to create a weaving pattern. To do this, we're going to start by drawing a column of just a few lines, usually 3 or 4 lines, about that much, going vertical, and then we want to draw some horizontal lines, 3 or 4 lines going that way. Then repeat the pattern. Vertical. There's nothing sacred about the number of lines you do, whatever it fills up, but strive to keep everything nice and consistent. Then once you've done it, do some vertical ones and horizontal. Once you've done one column, repeat the process again for the next column, but we're going to alternate it up. Strive to take up roughly the same amount of width for each column, alternating back and forth, vertical and horizontal. Ooh, I do apologize. I had a problem with my recording, and for whatever reason it did not record the last 5 minutes it took me to fill in the rest of this. But I use the same process over and over again, and you get the idea of what we're doing. We're filling it in with the alternating vertical and horizontal lines, and the number of lines really don't matter. You can see in some cases I have as few as 3 and as many as 5 or 6, depending on whatever it takes to fill in that area. Now this is done. Let's zoom out. Let's move on to the 12th one. Grab our selection tool. Do make sure you're still working in the sketch layer and select that layer. For this one, I call this a map pattern or a map texture. And the result's going to give you kind of almost a camouflage type look. We'll start by drawing a series of little islands that are either inside or just off the edge of your page. There's no particular shape that they need to be. You can go with thick and thin lines, so even varying up the pressure as you draw. Then you can start drawing inside of these little areas. The thing about it is we don't want to touch any of the lines that we draw, but we do want to fill it in and create almost this topography kind of pattern. You can get real small and real close with either one of them, drawing in each little bit. And this does look best if you do vary the pressure, having some thin lines and some thick lines inside of your overall area. Take some time now, play around with the pattern, play around with getting different kinds of shapes, but let it be random and have fun with it. to the 13th, deselect, and then reselect the 13th square. Grabbing your brush tool, let's go up and change this to our heavy wax smear crayon. With this crayon, you can see it gives you a nice little rough edge to it. And all we're going to do with these is make a variety of pill type shapes. Could also be thought of as bricks, but we don't want to touch the lines. We just want to draw a variety of different short and long lines going down your page. I suppose if you wanted to, you could do these across the page. There's nothing that says they have to be going down. But the whole purpose of this pattern is that you're paying attention to where they start and stop, and you're making sure that they don't touch each other. If they do, Command Z, back it up, and start again. I do try to strive so that they overlap almost like a true brick pattern would, so that you don't have too many gaps. And if you do have some gaps, you can go back in and fill them in with the lines that you do draw. I just love using this technique because it's a great mindless way of filling in an area without having to put in a lot of thought of exactly how everything should look. All right, let's move on to the 15th and final area. For this one, let's go up to our brush. Let's find the number 2 pencil. This one should be right underneath your rough pastel. This is what I call patchy scribbles. Let's zoom in, oops, excuse me, so I can see it just a little bit better. With this one, just like we've done with the others, I didn't select my area. Let's select it first. Just like we've done with the others, I'm going to start off with light scribbles and just kind of create a patch of one solid tone. This doesn't have to be very dark, but we do want it to be noticeable. Once you get one patch area created, change the direction and overlap it with another patch. You're going to repeat this process until the entire area is filled in, going in different directions. Again, try to keep your pencil marks relatively light. You don't want it to be too dark too quickly, but you also want to build up this value by overlapping everything and changing up the direction that you're going. So go horizontal for a little bit, go vertical for a little bit, go diagonal one way for a little bit. If you run into that one, go diagonal a different way. Do also strive that you keep everything nice and well blended. You don't want to have any areas that are too wide open with just a solid white space or a blank spot. You don't want to have any two areas that are overworked and start to get dark. If you do make a mistake, don't forget you can always swap over to white and paint in a tone of white. It'll match your background and look like it's almost erasing it away. All right, and with this, we're all complete. Let's zoom out and see what we've got. Now that you've finished up doing all of the different ones, you can go back and you can repeat if you need to fix anything, but save this up as a regular Photoshop document. When you go to File and Save or Save As, make sure you add your name to it. The format is going to be Photoshop, and we'll do Save. Upload this Photoshop document to our class page for today's exercise.